Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll get started in just a moment. If you need closed captioning, you'll find a link in the chat, or you can click the closed captioning button at the bottom of your screen. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Federal Innovation Through Prize Competitions webinar series with our friends from NASA. My name is Quinn Slayton. I'm a contractor with Challenge.gov. To increase accessibility and inclusivity, I'll share a little bit about myself. I'm coming to you from a very snowy and very dark and windy Portland, Maine, and today I'm wearing a green sweater. With me today are my Challenge.gov teammates, Kat Kemp, Laura Barlow, Phil Beloka, and Renata Bartlett. And we have our special guest from NASA, Steve Rader and Lynn Van Deventer. Some meeting logistics to go over before we get started. Number one, this event is being recorded, and our recording of this will be available on challenge.gov's YouTube channel prior or after the event. A link to live captioning for this event is provided in the chat, or you can click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. You're encouraged to ask questions by clicking on the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and you can use Zoom chat for any comments. By voluntarily attending this event, you agree to abide by the TTS Code of Conduct, and a link will be provided to that in the chat. And we ask that if you please leave the meeting if you do not agree to abide by the Code of Conduct. And with that, I will hand it over to my colleague, Kat Kemp, for a challenge.gov overview.
Thanks, Quinn. Hi, everyone. As Quinn said, my name is Kat Kemp. I'm a contractor with the Challenge.gov team. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman with chin-length brown hair, and today I'm wearing a cream-colored sweater. We're so excited that you're here with us today for the final of Challenge.gov's four-part webinar series, Federal Innovation Through Prize Competitions. This series explores how federal agencies are using prize competitions to drive innovation, address important challenges, and advance critical initiatives. Each session highlights a different agency and their approaches to designing, delivering, and scaling prize competitions. If you missed any of the previous webinars, you can watch the recordings on the Challenge.gov YouTube page, and I believe a link for that will be placed in the chat. Today, our special guest is Steve Rader from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, also and more commonly known by his acronym NASA. He'll discuss how prize competition programs fit into their agency innovation strategy, what other federal agencies can learn from their work, and how members of the public can participate in NASA-sponsored prize competitions. Steve currently serves as the program manager for NASA's Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation, also known as COSI, and with the NASA Tournament Lab. These programs are working to infuse challenges and crowdsourcing innovation approaches at NASA and across the federal government. The COSI Center of Excellence focuses on the study and use of curated crowdsourcing communities that use prize and challenge-based methods to deliver innovative solutions for NASA and the US government. Also joining us from NASA is Lan Van Deventer, who will be answering questions in the Q&A section of Zoom. Lynn is an open innovation advisor at NASA COSI, where she is responsible for challenge formulation, proposal evaluation integration, and challenge execution. Lynn's experience includes leading large-scale software development projects, managing the implementation of the strategic plan at Seattle Public Schools, and designing, developing, and managing global open innovation efforts for private sector companies, major foundations, and governments. Feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A for Lynn to answer or for us to bring up during the Q&A section of the event today. And with that, I will turn the microphone over to Steve to share about NASA's federal innovation through prize competitions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm Steve Rader. I am a white male, about 6 foot, with blonde hair that's starting to go a bit gray. I'm currently wearing a blue shirt with a darker blue blazer, and I'm coming from you from kind of a rainy Washington, D.C. So, very happy to be here and happy to be presenting to you today. Um, well, let's just dive in. I want to talk to you about kind of the power of the crowd from our toolkit perspective. As announced, we run the NASA's Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation. This was a center of excellence that was stood up back in 2011 at the request of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, to really help not just NASA, but any federal agency to run challenges. And we do that kind of in concert with GSA. We try to help in some different ways that I'll explain here today. The NASA Tournament Lab is actually our publicly facing brand. So that's what the public knows us as, that we run NTL challenges. And it was a name we started with very early. But we basically do serve the entire NASA agency and all of our field centers shown here, along with any federal agencies that want a little bit of help, particularly with contracts, and we'll talk about some of that. The services we provide is that we, one, do research with academia, and I'll talk about that. We have the contracts that can actually help us run these, and then we help actually educate folks on best practices as we go and do that. We're located virtually throughout the country, but our home center is Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. But our team is, I think, across something like 10 or 11 states. I mentioned research. From the very start. We were partnered with some of the best minds in the world on open innovation. Kareem Lakhani is one of the founders of a lot of the work on open innovation. Eric von Hippel is a legend at MIT on user open innovation. And then we also work with commercial groups that are kind of communities of commercial companies that come together, called Open Assembly, which is really diving into how companies interact and how they work in the commercial space on this. And we've been working with these folks for years and years, really trying to understand how this works, what are the best practices, and sharing what we have in there and having academic studies to back some of that up. We also meet regularly with academia, not just academia, but companies and organizations and governments from around the world, not just to tell them what we know, but to learn. Open innovation is a really wide open area with lots of different activities going on. And so we work to really understand what's happening and keep up with the best practices there as we go around. Now, one of the things was mentioned is that we focus on open innovation from curated communities. So a lot of organizations, including NASA, will run direct challenges, particularly Competes Act challenges, direct to the public where the agency runs those challenges. And in fact, challenge.gov is kind of designed to help do that. One of the things that we try to focus on is actually leveraging the ecosystem of companies out there that basically build and use curated communities to do open innovation, as well as open talent, which is kind of finding experts. And they're kind of two-sided networks. On the one side, they're crowd-facing, so they recruit people from the public with the idea that those people can connect to other people with the same passion, but also they provide a means to upskill and to learn something new and to try those skills out. And then they have a customer facing side of that network. So they provide them opportunities to build skills and to exercise those, but they actually harness those skills and that passion to produce solutions and products for companies or organizations that need answers, like NASA. And some of these are really interesting kind of crowds that we worked with. Topcoder, for instance, is a community of over 1.8 million software coders and data scientists who all are attracted to try to up their skills and learn. And actually, they have a really creative way that they run little challenges in sprints together and then weave those together for software development. We have our own internal crowd called NASA Spark, with about 30,000 NASA contractors and civil servants, where we actually pose questions to them to try to find that enterprise knowledge that we might not have. GrabCAD, who's a community of 13 million mechanical engineers and designers out of Estonia, where they actually have some of the world's best mechanical engineers and designers. Agorize, a 5 million person crowd, HeroX, over 130,000 solvers, but they're also connected to the entire XPRIZE network. They were kind of a spin-off out of XPRIZE. So, and Freelancer, which is really interesting, they have 77 million people in one community. That's close to 1% of the world's population in one community that we can tap into. So we actually have a ton of these, and through our various contracting mechanisms. And our biggest is our Noise 2 contract, our NASA Open Innovation Services 2 contract, where we have 32 of those crowds, in addition to our own crowd, and one called Future Engineers, where you do educational challenges. And then we actually do micro purchase challenges, which we use a government credit card to go out and run really quick, really small challenges with various vendors. And what's interesting is these create an ecosystem of about 50,000 open innovation firms and curated crowds that represent about 200 million people worldwide. And so we've been working this a while. We're actually about to come out with our Noise 3 contract, which will launch this spring, which will be a 10-year contract with almost $500 million in capacity. And we exercise these not just for NASA, but for any federal agencies that want to use these. And the reason for that is procurement is hard in government. It takes months and months to get a contract in place. And so if you're new to open innovation, you want to run a challenge, well, which one should you use? Should you try to do it yourself? Should you try to get a company to do it? And if you're going to have a company, which one? And then you have to go through this big procurement process. So what we have is an existing multi-vendor IDIQ contract. That's just a kind of contract where we can actually take the problem you're trying to solve, figure out, is it best served by a Competes Act challenge, where the government's paying the prize and it's a government challenge, or do we just simply want to ask one of these companies through the contract to go solve that problem, and they go run a challenge, in which case it can be open to the entire world and they bring us the products out of that. But it's really driven by those, and we call those procurement challenges. And by doing this, we provide a really fast way for any organization in the government to go and try these out. And they bid on the work. So they actually compete to try to solve your problem, and they give us different ways to do that. We select one. All of that, from the time we give them requirements to the time of awards, about 4 weeks. And so we can move very, very quickly to get someone on contract to go solve a hard problem. Again, we talk about the NASA Tournament Lab. I thought I'd give you just a couple of examples of that, and then we'll talk more about how all of this works. One was a recent one we did on GrabCAD for John Mather, who's a Nobel Prize-winning scientist who's working on these really large 100-meter ultralight star-shaped structures that they want to assemble in space. So it has to be kind of origami packed so that they can actually put this sunshade between a telescope and a star and kind of block out the star's light and be able to see planets as they go through kind of the region right around the star. And he came to us saying, hey, we've got this advanced concept. We're trying to build it. We're trying to understand what our options are. And so we actually got with GrabCAD. Again, 13 million mechanical engineers and designers ran a $10,000 contest, right? And with that, we ended up with 60 designs that were really amazing. And we actually selected those. And then he said, hey, these are really great. These top 5 are a really great way to start this new trade space and to get kind of an understanding of what it's going to take to do this. George Tehu, one of our executives for Mars program, came to us a few years ago and said, hey, scientists for years have been trying to figure out for our Mars program, when we have that 7 minutes of terror, we actually come through the atmosphere out of space, and we're not quite in the atmosphere, but we're not really in space. And we have to take solid tungsten and kind of toss it overboard to change and tweak the trajectory as we come in, because propulsion doesn't work really well and aero surfaces don't really work. And if you're going to take mass all the way to Mars, that's really expensive. We'd really like to do something other than just throw it overboard without getting any science. And so we put that project out in Incentive when it was still around and said, hey, are there ideas that we haven't been able to think of in our science community? And sure enough, we were able to find someone we never would have hired. They were in the oil field industry, but they came back and they said, hey, if you use barium for that material instead of tungsten, that when you eject it, it will dissolve in the atmosphere, and you can use the mass spectrometer on board another satellite to actually study the atmosphere of Mars. And that's actually been pitched to that team, and we're progressing down that path. And then the Earth and Space Air Prize, where we had Dr. Mayer and Dr. Mudgett, that really needed a more accurate and smaller aerosol sensor or particulate sensor for spacecraft, but they actually joined forces. And this is something really great about the Competes Act, that it allows for private partnerships. And we were able to partner with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, who also needed a particulate sensor, but they wanted it for pollution monitoring. And so we gathered our resources together and we ran this Competes challenge using Common Pool, one of our vendors now called Carrot. And we ended up with 2 working prototypes for less than $500,000. We ended up with 2 working prototypes in a bake-off, and those 2 working prototypes, actually one was a significant advance on current technology, and another was a totally new revolutionary approach to doing this measurement. So some really interesting kind of advanced development we've been able to do. Again, I said we work with other federal agencies. I thought I'd give at least one. Worked with Jim Grove at DHS when he was there to actually improve the millimeter wave detection systems. I don't know if you've noticed, but they don't really use those very much anymore because they weren't very accurate. And so they're working on the next generation of those machines. And they came with us with quite a bit of money. We weren't used to running really large challenges like this. And so we actually got with Kaggle, who's kind of part of Google now, and ran a $1.5 million prize challenge under Competes to find a better algorithm. And if you've been around this world, you know that algorithm challenges are the real sweet spot for open innovation. We can do so much there because there's very passionate crowds and folks around that really work hard to get you a lot of options. And sure enough, we were able to get 8 winning algorithms out of that the winning algorithm actually increased the accuracy to 98%. Now, they wouldn't tell us what it was classified, what the current detection rate was, but needless to say, they were blown away with this. They said this was the best $2.5 million, which is the total cost that they had spent in a very long time. And there's some great stories out of this. I'll just mention one, which is the 5th place winner was a freshman at Berkeley who was trying to learn machine learning. He wasn't even an expert. And I can get into that story in the Q&A, but it was fascinating. Some of the folks that were from Wall Street and others that had algorithms that really won that. So we've been doing this now since 2011, actually 2010, we started our pilots. And what we found is over time that we not only can do prize-based challenges, but we can actually access freelance experts in these crowds, folks that we don't have on our internal staff, and are able to kind of bring them in to do problem solving. Or we can do microtasking, which is kind of breaking up a task into lots of little bits, kind of like with Amazon Mechanical Turk. And we've really been experimenting with what kind of things. A lot of people think crowdsourcing is just about ideation, but we've found designs, detailed system designs, prototypes, been able to do demonstrations, have engineering models, develop software, do algorithms, do all sorts of multimedia, and then engage the crowd in various ways, or even find technologies that are out there, all using the crowd. We have lots of different data on that where we find what we can do in the sweet spot of cost and duration. And we found that this ecosystem can really address those, and each crowd can kind of handle a different aspect of that. And so this large collection of vendors has been really handy. We do have a website where we kind of have a clearinghouse of all of our challenges, which you can find at nasa.gov/get involved. We also have other work in open innovation. Our NASA Centennial Challenges does these really large challenges where they actually put a stake in the ground and say, look, we really don't know how to do this yet, but we think it's feasible. We're going to put a really large prize, and for 2 or 3 years, they'll actually run a large-scale competition trying to get something that we don't already have. They just launched the Lunar Recycle Challenge around how to actually take all the packaging and supplies packaging that we're going to end up with on the moon and make that into something that we can actually do 3D printing or make use out of. And they just started this. If you're interested, you can go to and find Lunar Recycle Challenge. We have a ton of citizen science work that you can get engaged with. If you go to NASA, www.citizenscience.gov, you'll find that there's all sorts of citizen science across the government. And if you go to nasa.gov/live, you'll find other pieces to this. But tons of places where you can plug in and become part of the science teams in analyzing data and really finding things. And then, of course, this International Space Apps Hackathon, the world's largest hackathon. You can see here this last time, they had almost 100,000 participants, 15,000 teams all over the world. It's really magical. It happens in October, and it's kind of part of this family of open innovation programs we have at NASA. STEM challenges, of course, have been there for a long time and continue, and we partner with them to try to emphasize where we can get the most out of that. We actually execute some STEM challenges for them and in concert with them. So they're really a partner with us on that, and we're trying to improve our capabilities there as well. One of the things that we are really dedicated to within COSI, though, is that we want this to be a serious technical tool. We don't want it to be something that's just done as this thing to entertain the public or to just be for STEM students to learn something new. We think there's serious value in actually helping people across the government, especially in technical areas, make advances in their science and actually come up with better and better innovative solutions in a way. And so we dedicate a lot to that. But one of the things we found early on is that there's organizational resistance to open innovation. In fact, there was an entire case study that's been taught for the last 10 years at Harvard Business School about NASA's rejection of open innovation. Because when we found out it was this great tool, we turned around and said to our workforce, hey, let's go use this. And they said no. They said, we can't do it. And it was really interesting because the dynamics were, hey, I came to NASA to be an innovator, and in the few cycles I'm allowed to do that, you're wanting to outsource it. And so we really had to step back and say, look, we need a better way to tell this story, because open innovation doesn't replace your capability to innovate. It actually just provides you a great starting point, but you have to get presented with that in a way that matters. And we found that stories really matter. And so if you noticed, I put that Earth and Space Air Prize slide up, and I had the pictures, not of the people who won the challenge, but the people who we want to highlight as heroes internally, the people that are actually using this methodologies. And then we just talk about the results. We are able to get really good stuff. And this isn't to downplay what our participants can do, but rather when we're talking internally, we make sure and focus on the challenge owner as the innovation hero. And then we actually work to say, hey, look, this is how we get a better starting point. This is how you have to go out and get the best ideas, technologies, and experts to help you innovate better than anyone else. And I'll talk a little bit about why in a second. But a lot of this is with data too. We collect a lot of data about our challenges. We make sure and find out from the owners, did this solve your problem? And you kind of see about 95% of the time they are successful in various ways. Many times it's actually more cost effective than the methods they would have used if they hadn't used innovation, about 75% of the time. And the average savings for schedule is almost 50%. That happens on about half the project. So we think we've saved the government quite a bit of money, but we use these kind of charts to really tell our folks, hey, there's value here. And then we tell the story of how this is gaining in popularity. And hey, by the way, the people you're competing with in this world are all using this. And we try to create some kind of FOMO, right? Fear of missing out, that other people are doing great things with this. You should too, right? You can kind of see here too that we've really kind of ramped up in a lot of what we're doing. Part of our story too is the why. And this was a big game changer for us in really selling this internally as a way to do business, because what we said is, look, when we took a step back, we were like, why is this stuff working so well? Why is it giving us such amazing results? And what we found, and this is kind of a summary, one slide of lots of slides that I use, is that the world has really changed. It has no longer been something where you can just go to a few vendors and talk to a few people and do some Google searches and find the best starting point for your technology and your idea. You can't find the technologies or expertise because there is so much going on. In fact, 90% of all scientists that have ever lived on planet Earth are alive today. And that's because of the kind of exponential growth that we've been going through in both population, but also in the increases in wealth around the world. And that's created this tsunami of technology that is happening using a lot of these building block technologies like blockchain and generative AI and drones and cheap robotics and 3D printing. And you can kind of go on and on. And the thing about all of those technologies is they are being used across every industry and every domain to innovate and combine with their technologies to solve their problems. And the pro is that at no other time in history of man have there been so many amazing solutions out there to problems. The con is if you have a problem, trying to find some of those solutions and technologies and kind of ways to solve your problem in innovative ways, they're hidden to you. You can't find it. And if you think you can Google the latest and greatest technologies, you don't understand how big that tsunami of technology is and how fast things are coming. So we talk a lot about how that's working. We give examples of companies that have been disrupted by, say, sensors that's come out in the mining industry that they didn't know about. And if they hadn't found it, they would have gone out of business, things like that. So we make this case that, look, crowdsourcing is a really important tool because there is this thing going on out there. And then we go on to say open innovation taps into the human network that statistically can work across the entire set of industries and technical domains to find those different types of people, the different kinds of ideas. In fact, this idea acts as a dragnet across all of those industries to find what you need to solve the hard problems and do it in new ways that you didn't know about, but other people already have been making progress on. So I'll round it out with this last little section, which is who are participating in these challenges. People are always fascinated by why is anyone participating? Where are they coming from? Who are they? And I have to say, it's everyone. Not statistically everyone. It's a small slice of everyone, but it is a large set of people. And if you go read Clay Shirky's book, Cognitive Surplus, he gets a really great explanations about the fact that people are passionate about what they care about. And they want to contribute in all sorts of ways. They want to learn. They want to take what they've learned and make a difference. And they often find that in their day jobs, they don't get an opportunity to really do that. And so people are joining these kinds of communities and they're participating. And for us, we know people are passionate about NASA and the NASA name. But people are actually participating in these crowds independent of that, right? So we get the double whammy of being able to find people who are passionate about what they do and passionate about NASA. And we find that open innovation provides them this opportunity for them to actually become real contributors to our mission. But they're doing that for organizations around the world. I'll give you one example of just what difference this is making in some people's lives. This is Lauren Fell. I first was exposed to Lauren Fell back in 2015 when I posted a really insignificant challenge for us. We ran I think it was like a $500 challenge for a storyboard on Freelancer. And it was a storyboard for a video that explained an RFID system. So the project was trying to get funding and they were trying to actually show what they were doing and explain it. It was kind of complicated and they were kind of nerdy. And so they needed a video. And so we posted this challenge. And Lauren at the time was a kind of a fresh out of college psychologist. And she saw this and she decided to write a little PowerPoint that showed kind of each of the scenes and a script. And it ended up winning. It ended up being the best one. And we actually had another challenge that created a video out of that was really quite amazing. But what was interesting about that is that just a little bit after that, we found that she was submitting on an origami radiation shielding packaging. And not just bidding on it, she actually won second place. And she was using PowerPoint to explain this origami concept for packing this radiation shielding. But she didn't stop there. We noticed the next year she had actually submitted her CAD design and a picture of a 3D printed design. So I started thinking, oh my gosh, she has learned how to do computer aided design and went out and bought a 3D printer and taught herself that. But then she went on to do more of these challenges and more. And in fact, on this challenge, she had learned how to use a Raspberry Pi and started working on inflatable robotics. Uh, and she just continued to place a first place in our lunar delivery challenge. She participated in our lunar torch challenge to kind of light up the dark craters. She was on that ultra starlight shade and won honorable mention. Again, not an engineering degree. And in fact, recently won our Mars XR challenge to try to create environments that we use for virtual training. And what's interesting about that is I actually got to meet her, and I said, it appears to me that you kind of adjusted your life based on these challenges. She said, absolutely. I went out and I learned CAD. I learned how to use a 3D printing. I learned how to use Raspberry Pi and do robotics. And I changed my major, and I'm now finishing up my PhD in quantum cognition. And she has gone on to go participate in analog space missions, to do TED Talks. And she now has a startup called Lunaria One, where she's actually creating the environments that we'll use to grow vegetables on the moon. So when we think about who's doing this, it's people that are curious, that want to engage, that want to be passionate. And what's great is we're providing a way that they become part of our mission at NASA. So I just tell you, if you're a part of the public and engaged in this, go to our Get Involved site and check out what we've got. There's a whole section on prizes and challenges, but lots of different ways to engage with us. And of course, visit challenge.gov, because that's where we post all of the challenges across all of the agencies, and you can always find exciting work. Some of the best parts of our work are actually the work we're doing with other agencies on challenges, and it's just life-changing with the NIH and CDC and EPA and the Bureau of Reclamation. Just kind of goes on and on. There's some amazing work that's being done in government through challenges. These are some of the current ones that are out there. I know that's like a little bit of an eye chart, but you can just go to challenge.gov and you'll see all these that we've got on there, that our Office of STEM Engagement's got going, and that the other folks that we work with are doing. And then there's other agencies as well. So I'm sure all the other challenge.gov folks can tell you much more about that are on the call today. And with that, I will open it up to questions and discussion.
Amazing. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for sharing about all the different ways that NASA is leveraging these tools and approaches and partnerships to be able to innovate across all kinds of different topic areas. We have a lot of questions, both came through the Q&A. I know Lynn has been answering some of those, so folks, make sure you can check on the answered tab. You can kind of see some of those responses. And we also had questions that people submitted through registration. To get us started, I love that story about how prize competitions have impacted Lauren Fell's life and what came from her participation. Do you have other examples like that? Are there other participants who have had similar experiences?
Oh yeah, there's so many. In fact, it's funny, we keep analyzing the data to try to find folks that have been participating. Like I found there's a husband and wife team that just won the Break the Ice Centennial Challenge. And there's I was looking at the data and found there's actually like 5 adults that are all from different parts of the country that all have the last name. And I finally figured out they're all brother and sister, like family, that are adults now, but the way they stay connected is by doing challenges, and they each take a part and do this virtual thing. Hugo Shelley, he's a guy who actually, one of my favorite challenges, someone posted what's my favorite memorable challenge. It's probably the space poop challenge. Yeah. We can talk about that if you want. It's kind of gross, but it's also fascinating. We had 20,000 registrants for that, 5,000 submissions. We actually had the vendor kind of whittle those down. But what's fascinating is Hugo Shelley was a designer from the UK. We did that as a procurement challenge, so they were really doing that for HeroX. And Hugo Shelley was just a designer. He had the 3rd place. It was kind of a neat design. But he went on to also win the next generation animal tracking challenge that we did, where they were trying to track animals through satellites. And then most recently, this kind of blew me away. He put an entire team together and is now one of the main contenders. There's three winners that are actually continuing to do challenge work for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency for a challenge that they're running through us called MagQuest. Go look it up. It's amazing. They started with an ideation and they moved through, and Hugo Shelley put together a team that designed a spacecraft to actually monitor the magnetosphere of the Earth, because north changes and you have to know where it is in order to make adjustments for things like GPS. And so we have this infrastructure responsibility, and Hugo Shelley has now become a spacecraft provider, and he's actually going to launch a CubeSat along with two other teams and put up a sensor that's going to monitor that and provide data back to the NGA. Amazing stuff, right? And it's really changed some folks' lives.
I am thinking about that sibling group and just imagining their family group chat.
I know. Something everyone should take on this holiday season is
Yes, as you
propose
get
that
ready
to your
to see
family.
family.
Yeah. One of the guys who just won the Deep Space Food Challenge, he was this retiree who he did it himself, but his whole family was in charge of testing and branding, and like he enlisted everyone to help him. It was really awesome. In
Very
fact,
cool.
we went to a chef's place where they're actually figuring out how to make food in this kind of spinning cooker, because in zero G, the food just kind of goes everywhere and you can't get it. So he invented this new way of cooking food in space. And we actually went to a lab because he's partnered with this chef. And we had this amazing meal of new foods that was made using this new technology. It's fascinating.
Amazing. We had a number of questions come in through registration about eligibility. So talking about all these different examples of people and winners, and from all kinds of, from Brisbane, Australia to UK to the United States.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about who is eligible to participate in NASA prizes and competitions, and those that you partner with with other agencies?
Yeah, you will always want to read your terms and conditions as you find these challenges, because they're all a little different. Some are targeted to K through 12, right? And we're trying to do that. Some are targeted only at university students. And that's just because of the program we're working for. However, in most of our public challenges, we run under procurement authority. And if we run under procurement authority, it's technically not us running it. So what we're really doing is we're outsourcing it to these communities. And I really shouldn't even say we're running challenges. What I really should say is we have a problem that we outsource the solution for, but they still give it the NASA Tournament Lab logo, so you know that they're doing it for us, and they can do it, have participants from all over the world. Now, obviously, there are some countries on lists that there's not a legal way to exchange currency, and so you can't get paid if you're from any of the banned countries, right? But those are well known, and that goes for really any company in the US or most of the developed world has those kind of restrictions. But if you're from anywhere in the world that is not on those lists, you can participate in those challenges, and we try to make those open for everyone. And sometimes we actually will work with other federal agencies or other agencies around the world to target those. So we actually work with the State Department in a joint effort to find people in the global South to get them up to going on space problems. So we definitely work in the public. If we're running a Compete Act challenge and we're running it as NASA, then that's actually a government challenge that has restrictions that said it has to be US only. Now, there are some nuances to that in that it has to be a US led team. So we're going to pay US, but I believe there are some ways that you can actually have a team that's led by the US and have other team members. That's just how the teams can work. But different ones have different restrictions, and you'll want to read those terms and conditions. But we've really opened the door for lots of people to participate. And we try to provide a diversity. And we at any one time we're working on about between 70 to 100 projects. So there's no shortage of these out there. And the Challenge.gov team can tell you at any one time there are a lot of challenges that are open. I will also say we tap into open talent networks. So if you're on Upwork or Maven or Business Talent Group, these are on our contract or through subcontracts of our vendors too. And if we're looking for someone who can do something very specific and that happens to be you, we can actually get you on to do this stuff. We had I can go on and on in stories, amazing folks that we've been able to engage that way.
Yeah. Excuse me, a question that comes up very often for the challenge.gov team, and I know that you addressed this too, is about intellectual property and IP rights. So
Yeah.
we had a question that came through the Q&A, but it's so common. We hear it everywhere. But how is IP handled in competitions? Are there concerns from the public that may be exploiting the public for ideas and only the government benefit from results financially or with credit? So can you talk about the IP question?
Great question. Well, first off, all of the platforms we work with and the U.S. government in particular, we take very serious the IP that we receive through submissions. We know that if we're not paying you for that, and for whatever rights we have set out in the terms and conditions, then we can't use it, and we are very adamant about that as well as the vendors. You can set the competitions up to work however makes sense. Like if you're doing a graphics competition, often we'll get the intellectual property all ownership, because what else are you going to use it for? It's not like you can use that graphic for something else, right? And so that's a lot of the platforms are simply set up to deliver us IP. Most of the time, if we're asking for a design or something, we're going to ask for, in exchange for the prize money, and again, this only applies to if you get a prize, for a royalty-free license to use. In other words, we're paying you this prize, and we expect to be able to use that, and we have the terms of that usage in the terms and conditions. Now, if we're the only customer, then that's like getting all the IP, right? And so we try to kind of think about what the market for that is. But if there's a commercial market for it, we expect you can go sell that and claim a patent for it, whatever you want to do, but we're going to claim that license. In Competes Act, we actually don't claim any intellectual property. We're trying to stimulate startups. Now, we reserve the right to negotiate for usage rights at the end, but normally that's the way that works. So it's the full gamut of all IP to no IP. And if you're trying to participate in this, you should feel very secure in knowing that no one's going to steal your IP. That is something we're very, very diligent about. Now, if you're on the, I want to go run a challenge, what you need to know is a lot of times if you're asking that question, what you're really asking is, am I going to give away all my secrets by running an open challenge? And what I tell people is, you're importing ideas. You're not exporting. So you will only show the competitors what you want to show them. Now, if you need some very secretive design that's ITAR created protected, and you have to show it in order for them to improve it or solve the problem, that's not going to fly. You can't do that. That's against the law. But if you analyze that problem to try to figure out what's a subset of that, maybe there's a component of that that doesn't give anything secret away that you can run a challenge around that will actually help you solve your problem. So these companies are actually really good at abstracting a problem. In fact, I talked to this. Well, I won't give it away. There was a challenge on Topcoder, and the challenge was how can we develop a system that can monitor social media uploads, publicly accessible social media uploads for tourists that go through Yellowstone National Park, and only using that data track individual bison throughout the park. Okay? They successfully did it. Their client was not named in the challenge, but the client was the CIA. And what they really wanted was the code that they adapted to detect Russians in Crimea and track them. So now they gave me permission to tell that story. I'll just tell you that. But what's fascinating is I actually told that story while I was on a panel with the CEO of Topcoder. And he goes, "Oh, I knew we did that challenge. I had no idea who it was." So they know how to obscure the problem. And that's what they do for commercial companies all the time, because this is a chief a concern for those companies as well.
Mm-hmm. So interesting. And interesting, what I appreciate about that question and the question before about how flexible and dynamic price competitions are and how they're able to meet a need while still sort of taking these other considerations, through IP, through how do you structure, how do you like set up the data to be able to, if you're planning an algorithm, like that it's a tool that has so much flexibility with it.
Yeah.
It's the Swiss Army knife in some
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and the teams that are doing this are really skilled at terms and conditions and working with lawyers
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that we're getting that IP statement right.
Yeah.
The one of the reasons we use all these commercial crowds is we can do lots of it, and they're very skilled at all these pieces, and we don't have to, try to have 5 people that know this to try to do, hundreds of these. So
Yeah. Well, we know that we have in our audience some other federal employees from other agencies that are interested in this mechanism. So, a couple of questions from sort of the federal employee perspective. One is, can you share a little bit about how you choose or how you help guide agencies to choose a prize competition versus other procurement mechanisms? Why advocate when this tool in the toolbox
yeah,
is right?
yeah, it's funny. We actually are trying to make this tool something that every scientist and every engineer knows about and knows how to use because it's just so powerful and necessary
Mm-hmm.
these days. Um, a lot of times, prize challenges are very top down. And so organizations will go pick, hey, we want you to do a prize challenge on this. That's fine. But what we find is the most important piece of getting a challenge right is finding the owner of the problem who will be responsible for implementing it. And if they're voluntold for that, chances of actually doing something with whatever comes out of it goes drastically down. So we're really trying to sell engineers at the point of where their problems are at and that have access to all the stakeholders necessary. And we really say that's the first thing. You have to own the problem if you want to solve it. And then we actually do workshops on how to actually identify the right problem to scale it to the right. You don't want to take a big complex problem that's got that's going to take a ton of different disciplines and do a $200,000 challenge with that. That's not enough incentive to get a whole multidiscipline team together. Now, there's a ton of innovation challenges that we do in that price point, but they're problems that have 1 to 2 disciplines around them that one person can take on without having to know, how to make a circuit board and do software and do electronics and physics, and that's an important piece. Now you can do these other challenges. They're just $1 million challenges because they've got to be able to afford to put people together, bring people from academia, bring people from industry. So we look at how much do you have to solve this problem? What's the scope? Can we narrow that scope? Should we narrow that scope? Really, how well do you understand your problem? And this is what's fascinating is I always go back to the Einstein quote, if I had an hour to solve a really hard problem, I'd spend 55 minutes understanding the problem and only 5 minutes solving it. Many people, when they have a problem, they just want to get up on a whiteboard and start solving. And what we tell people is that's the exact opposite thing you should do. The first thing you should do is start listing your constraints and your assumptions and what you think that problem is and what's the performance of your current system versus where you want to be after this is fixed. Or is this are we fixing something or are we making something better? Are we trying to come up with something that's totally new? Understand what your problem is, and you better understand who all the stakeholders are that are going to be needed to make that change once you get a solution. Because if you don't have them all on board, they may not accept what you've brought and they will kind of reject it and say, well, you didn't talk to us. And so here's 5 reasons that it won't work. Some of that is just change management, people resisting change. And other times it's valid reasons that you didn't actually get all of the constraints and therefore you didn't understand how to solve the problem. So we think successful problem solving is understanding the problem and understanding who's trying to solve this problem so that you get all the right participation. And the right innovation is only valuable in the execution of a solved problem. In other words, it has to be realized. If you have an idea that you get in that's this great idea, well, that's great. but it's not actually innovation until someone builds it and makes it happen. And if you don't have the way to do that, then why are you trying to solve the problem, right? So a lot of that has to do with who's going to hold the banner for this problem and get it all the way through the finish line.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like a lot of ideas, having a champion, having someone who's able to go from end to end and be flexible through that process. That's how change happens.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Another question for our federal agency friends is, how do they get in touch with you? How do they partner? How do they connect with you to be able to explore this together?
Yeah, so the Get Engaged will get you contacts to me. You can always reach out to me personally, Steve Rader. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me lots of different places. You can find me through the challenge.gov team. We know each other, and we point people to them, and they point people to us. So you can contact us. I think Lynn will probably put a link in the chat as well as we're talking. And if we're going to engage you as another federal agency, the first thing we'll start talking about, we'll talk about what challenge you have to make sure it's something worth doing. But the first thing is to talk about agreements, interagency agreements and how those work. There's invoicing transitions going on right now. There's a new way of kind of doing business in that. But we've got a crack team on agreements, and we know how to work with legal, we know how to work with procurement, we know how to work with the agreements folks, and that's really helpful. We've done some agreements in literally weeks. Others have taken multiple years. So it kind of depends on who you are and what your legal team's like. But we're definitely there to help and to try to make that smooth however we can. One of the things that we have that's really an advantage is speed. We can get things done really, really fast. And if everyone's willing, like we had, I think one agency, I won't say who it was, but they had a few $1 million that at the end of the year, they needed to get spent. And we were able to get the agreement, get the funding order, get the contract, and get it on a challenge really in just a few weeks. It was yeah. And if you're in government, you know what I'm talking about. There's those funding things that come at the end of the year, right? So.
And another question, back to thinking about challenge design or challenge setup. So a question that we have in the Q&A is about preparing the data. So we have the question says, when creating a challenge for something like Kaggle, who are the parties participating or preparing the data for use in the challenge? Discussions around privacy, security, legal, working with data engineers to prepare the data. Is that done internally or contractors, or sort of how, like when you're pulling all those pieces together?
Yeah, it's all of the above. It really depends on who's coming to us with the problem, right? Almost always the first question we have is, what's your data? What does it look like? Show us your data. Do you have access? Do you have approval to release it? What's it look like? And then we more and more are asking questions about bias. That challenge we did with DHS, one of the things that Kaggle was in the middle of was working data bias, and they actually showed DHS that, hey, you guys are not able to detect for these minority groups that don't, particularly transgender, because you don't have enough samples in your data. And it was a real eye opener for us to be like, okay, we really got to keep these things in mind going forward. But it's interesting. We do have people who are trying to solve problems and they don't have a great big data set. And so we actually have a couple of things. If they have data, but it's in bad shape, or it needs, they've got a bunch of video and they need somebody to give truth data to some of it. We've actually engaged crowds like Sama or Amazon Mechanical Turk to actually help us get the data in good shape. And some are highly protected data, and Sama can handle that. If you don't know the Sama story, it's amazing. You can read the book Giving Work, and it's just tremendous the way they've engaged kind of people in the slums around the world to give them data skills. It's truly amazing. But we try to work with those, right, to get that data in good shape, or we put it back on the challenge owner and said, look, you got to come back when you have good shape. We can also run challenges to go find data. And we've done that with EPA and NOAA and others and said, here's the data we have, but we're looking at all this stuff. can someone else find us commercial data sets or data sets from other areas that we don't know about? And so it can be a really good discovery mechanism for data as well. So sometimes we'll have multi-phase where the first phase is let's go find all the data or let's go fix all the data. And then we move on to the next. That's a great question. And I tell you, if you're not using challenges for data science, it should always be your first step because it just accelerates everything and it gives your data science team, 5 or 6 solutions that have all proven themselves to be effective, and you can really start on optimizing from a supersized supercharged algorithm. So it's fascinating.
Amazing.
We have stories of like 10x 100x improvement. It's crazy.
That's really that power of being able to amplify by tapping into these networks and tapping into these scientists from all different perspectives. It's really inspiring. Well, as we come to the top of the hour and getting to close, I want to make sure, Steve, that I ask you what's next? What's on the horizon for NASA COSI, NASA Tournament Lab? What should we be looking forward to?
Yeah. So we are just on the front end of starting a community of our own because we recognize people are so passionate about NASA and that they want to contribute, that we want a contributor network, right? So once you've won a challenge or participated in a challenge and met certain criteria, we're trying to get a community where we'll invite you in, and depending on kind of how you've shown your mettle, we're gonna give you more opportunities to engage with us on more challenges, to join up with the people who were part of your challenge. We just finished the Deep Space Food Challenge with Centennial Challenge. This platform could bring all those participants who have had a great face-to-faces and they're collaborating and working with each other and bring them together regularly, right? So provide a platform where people can continue their work and then start to leverage off of each other. And people like Lauren Fell who go, challenge to challenge, they're probably going to be the glue that starts to pull these folks together. And we're going to curate that community to where folks learn more about what's going on with NASA and that they become true participants in what we're doing as we do space exploration. So look for
again, look ahead, find opportunities to connect. I think there are exponential benefits when it comes to like building that community, building connection.
Yeah, I see Mark was asking, do you have to win a NASA challenge? We're going to have different requirements for different levels of activity. So if you've ever worked with curated communities, it's kind of like video games. You got to level up a little bit, and the higher you get, the different things you get to do. It'll probably be like that. So by the time we fully deploy it, it will have a come all feature that will invite that anyone can get onto. But then there will be things that you got to do to unlock more. So great question.
Oh, that's exciting. Good question.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Steve, and everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Lynn for handling questions in the chat, and for all of you being here as we close out our fall webinar series. This recording will be posted on challenge.gov's events page. If you would like a copy of Steve's slides, send an email to team@challenge.gov, and we'll send you a PDF copy of the slides. As Steve said, go to challenge.gov, visit challenge.gov to see the open prize competitions, not only from NASA, but across all federal agencies. Sign up for a public solver account, follow federal challenges you might be interested in, and submit a solution through challenge.gov. My colleague Phil has been placing links in the chat, including our feedback survey. So make sure you fill that out. Let us know how we can improve our events. And we encourage you to sign up for our public newsletter. Stay up to date on federal prize competitions, in the news about winner announcements as they come down, and follow us on social media. Phil is also placing those links in the chat. With that, thank you very much. Thanks for being here today. Stay safe. Have a good holiday season.